Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to the English Globe, where learning English meets understanding the world. We are so happy to have you here today, wherever you are listening from, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. Thank you for joining us. Today, we have a very interesting and important topic that connects language, politics, and the global economy. It's about the APEC Summit, one of the biggest international meetings that brings together leaders from across the Asia-Pacific region to discuss trade, growth, and cooperation.
That's right, Adam. The full name of APEC is the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. It's a major forum where 21 countries come together to talk about how to make trade easier, fairer, and more beneficial for everyone in the region. In today's episode, we'll explore what the APEC Summit is, why it matters, and how it affects the relationship between two of the world's most powerful countries, the United States and China. We'll look at how this year's summit has become a stage for new discussions, quiet rivalries, and hopes for global stability.
Yes, and before we begin our deep conversation, we kindly invite you, dear listeners, to support the English Globe. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our new educational podcasts. We really appreciate your support because it helps us reach more learners from around the world who want to improve their English and learn about important global issues in a simple, clear, and enjoyable way.
And we'd love to hear from you. Please tell us in the comments below where you are listening from. Maybe your city or country. And share your opinions about today's topic. Do you think meetings like the APEC Summit can really help the world economy? Or do you believe that global trade has become more about competition than cooperation? Your comments not only help us understand our amazing audience, but also help other learners read and practice English with real ideas from real people like you.
Exactly, Julia. Now let's start with a simple question. What is the APEC Summit? Imagine leaders from countries like the United States, China, Japan, Australia, Canada, and many others sitting together to discuss how to make trade smoother between their nations. A PEC is not a political organization or a military alliance. It's mainly about economic cooperation, which means countries trying to grow together by exchanging goods, services, and knowledge in fair ways that benefit everyone.
That's a great explanation, Adam. And it's important for our English learners to know that APEC was created in 1989, more than 30 years ago. The world was very different back then. Many Asian countries were just starting to grow their economies, and technology was not as advanced as it is today. The goal of APEC was simple: to bring countries together to reduce trade barriers and support peaceful development through cooperation. In other words, APEC was meant to make business easier, not harder.
Yes, and over the years, APEC has played an important role in connecting East and West, helping the Asia-Pacific region become one of the most dynamic economic zones in the world. Today, APEC members represent nearly 60% of the global economy and almost half of the world's trade. That's huge. So when world leaders meet at the APEC Summit, the decisions they make can affect not only big companies but also workers, students, and everyday people in many countries.
That's what makes this topic so important for everyone listening today. Even if you are not interested in economics, the APEC Summit still matters to you because it influences the price of products, the stability of jobs, and even how countries cooperate in areas like technology, environment, and education. Understanding global events like this helps you think critically in English and connect your learning to real-world events. It's a great way to improve vocabulary and comprehension naturally.
Exactly, Julia. And one of the most talked about parts of this year's APEC Summit is the relationship between the United States and China. These two countries have the world's largest economies, and their trade decisions influence almost every other nation. Many people call it a showdown because both sides are trying to protect their interests while also keeping communication open. It's not an argument. It's more like a delicate balance between cooperation and competition.
And that balance is not easy to maintain. The US wants fair trade, transparency, and protection for technology industries, while China focuses on growth, new markets, and building strong regional partnerships. This difference in goals makes the APEC Summit a fascinating place to study how diplomacy and economics work together. For English learners, this topic offers so many useful new words like negotiation, summit, trade policy, and economic growth. We'll explain all of them step by step in this episode.
Our goal in this podcast is to help you understand these big international topics in clear, simple English. You don't need to be an expert in economics to follow along. Just listen carefully, learn new vocabulary, and enjoy the conversation. By the end of this episode, you'll not only know more about the APEC Summit, but also improve your ability to discuss global issues confidently in English. So sit back, relax, and let's begin our journey into the world of trade, diplomacy, and cooperation.
That's beautifully said, Adam. And for our listeners who are learning English, remember that podcasts like this one are a great way to train your listening skills. You can listen while doing daily tasks, and if you don't understand a word, don't worry. The more you listen, the more natural English will become for you. So, let's start exploring the meaning and history behind the APEC Summit and understand why this event is shaping the future of international trade and communication.
To really understand the importance of today's APEC Summit, we need to go back in time and look at how it all began. The idea of APEC was born in the late 1980s, a period when the world was changing rapidly. Many Asian countries were growing fast, technology was improving, and trade was becoming more global. However, there were still many barriers between countries that made business difficult. Leaders and economists realized that cooperation was the key to future growth, and that's how APEC was created, to help build trust and make trade more open across the Asia-Pacific region.
That's right, Adam. The official founding of APEC took place in 1989 in Canberra, the capital city of Australia. It started with just 12 member economies, including countries like the United States, Japan, South Korea, Canada, and Australia, and later expanded to 21 members. The early goal of APEC was very simple: to promote free and fair trade among countries around the Pacific Ocean. In those early years, there was a lot of hope that if countries traded more with each other, they would also develop stronger friendships and prevent conflicts.
Exactly, Julia. In those early days, APEC was not about power or rivalry. It was more about partnership and development. Many of the member countries were still developing their industries, and they saw trade as a way to reduce poverty and improve living standards. For example, countries like South Korea, Malaysia, and Thailand used trade partnerships within APEC to grow quickly and modernize their economies. The focus was on mutual benefit, the idea that if one country grew, others could also benefit through cooperation.
Yes, and another interesting point is that APEC was designed to be very flexible. Unlike other trade organizations that have strict rules and legal agreements, APEC works based on discussion, consensus, and voluntary cooperation. This means no country is forced to follow something it doesn't agree with. Instead, members talk, share ideas, and find common ground. That's why APEC has often been called a forum, rather than an organization. It's a space for open dialogue, not a place for political battles.
However, as time passed, the world economy started to change. The 1990s and early 2000s saw the rise of new economic powers, and none was more influential than China. After China joined APEC in 1991, it quickly became a central player in global trade. Its manufacturing sector expanded, exports grew rapidly, and it became known as the world's factory. This was good for global trade, but it also began to shift the balance of power inside APEC. Suddenly, the U.S. was no longer the only economic leader in the region. there was a new player on the stage.
That's when cooperation slowly started to turn into competition. The United States, which had long been the leader in trade and technology, began to see China's rise as both an opportunity and a challenge. On one hand, the two countries traded more than ever before, creating millions of jobs and cheaper goods for consumers. On the other hand, their goals were not always aligned. The US wanted open markets and intellectual property protection, while China focused on national growth, industrial development, and building global influence.
And this difference in goals became more visible as APEC grew larger and the global economy became more complex. Around the early 2000s, new topics began entering APEC discussions, such as digital trade, environmental sustainability, and energy security. These topics were not just about buying and selling goods. They were about how economies could adapt to a changing world. This was also the time when technology became a key factor in trade competition. Countries started to realize that whoever led in technology would lead in global trade.
That's so true, Adam. And as technology advanced, politics and economics became more closely connected. APEC meetings became more than just friendly discussions. They turned into platforms where countries presented their visions for the future. For example, the US emphasized innovation, fairness, and transparency, while China promoted ideas like the Belt and Road Initiative, which focused on building infrastructure and trade networks across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Both sides wanted prosperity, but they had different paths to reach it.
And that difference, Julia, is what slowly brought the APEC Summit to where it is today, a stage where cooperation and competition coexist. Every time leaders meet, they share ideas about growth and progress, but behind those polite speeches are strategic goals. Each country wants to protect its interests, attract investment, and shape the future of trade. Yet despite all the differences, APEC still remains one of the few global forums where both the US and China sit together, talk directly, and search for common understanding.
That's one of the most fascinating things about APEC. Even though it brings together countries with very different political systems and values, it has managed to keep the dialogue open for more than 3 decades. That's not easy in today's world. It shows that even when nations disagree, they can still find ways to communicate, negotiate, and cooperate. And this, dear listeners, is a powerful lesson for all of us. That communication, whether in diplomacy or language learning, is the bridge that keeps people connected.
Well said, Julia. For our English learners, this part of APEC's history offers not only economic lessons, but also great English vocabulary. Words like diplomacy, cooperation, negotiation, and trade bloc are essential for anyone studying international topics in English. When you hear these words, try to think of their meanings not just as definitions, but as ideas that describe how countries interact. Understanding them will help you follow global news more easily and make your English conversations richer and more meaningful.
That's a great tip, Adam. And as we move forward in our discussion, it's important to remember that APEC is not just about governments. It's about people. It's about students, workers, and entrepreneurs who benefit from a more connected world. When countries cooperate, it becomes easier to study abroad, share technology, and create jobs across borders. So the history of APEC is really a story about global teamwork. It's about how nations learn that growth comes faster when we help each other instead of competing blindly.
Exactly. And even though competition is natural, APEC has shown that it's possible to balance both competition and cooperation in a healthy way. The challenge now is to keep that balance as the world faces new problems like climate change, inflation, and digital inequality. The next sections of our podcast will explore how the United States and China approach these challenges at the APEC Summit and what their goals mean for the future of trade. But for now, we can already see how the roots of today's tensions were planted in the history of cooperation itself. Now that we've explored how APEC started and how cooperation slowly turned into competition, it's time to focus on one of the key players in this global forum, the United States. Understanding America's goals at the APEC Summit helps us see why these meetings are more than just photo opportunities. For decades, the U.S. has been one of the strongest voices in promoting free trade, open markets, and international standards. But in today's world, America's goals are becoming more complex, balancing both economic interests and political values.
That's right, Adam. When we talk about America's goals at APEC, we're really talking about three main things: fair trade, innovation, and security. The US doesn't just want to trade more, it wants trade to be fair and balanced. That means protecting American industries from unfair competition, ensuring workers' rights, and making sure that trade benefits not just big corporations, but also small businesses and ordinary people. The idea is that global trade should create opportunity, not inequality.
Exactly, Julia. One of the key phrases often used by American leaders is a level playing field. It means that all countries should follow the same rules so that no one has an unfair advantage. For example, if one country heavily supports its industries through government aid or restricts foreign companies, it can create imbalance. The U.S. wants APEC to be a space where transparency and accountability are promoted, where businesses can compete based on quality, not favoritism or hidden policies.
And another major goal for the United States is innovation. America believes that the future of trade will depend on technology, from artificial intelligence and green energy to biotechnology and digital platforms. That's why US representatives often use APEC meetings to encourage innovation-friendly policies. They want to make sure that ideas can move across borders as freely as goods and services. For English learners, this brings new vocabulary like intellectual property, research collaboration, and digital economy.
Yes, and with innovation comes the question of security, especially in areas like technology and data. The U.S. wants to make sure that global supply chains, the networks that connect raw materials, factories, and markets, are safe, reliable, and transparent. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries faced shortages in medical supplies because supply chains were too dependent on a few places. The U.S. now aims to diversify trade routes, meaning it wants to work with more partners to reduce that risk in the future.
That's a good point, Adam. The US has also been emphasizing what it calls economic resilience. This means building a global economy that can survive shocks, like pandemics, wars, or natural disasters, without collapsing. Resilience is about flexibility and cooperation. The US believes that if countries share resources, technology, and information, they can recover faster and stay stronger. In APEC discussions, resilience has become one of the most repeated words because it shows how much the world has changed in the past few years.
Another interesting part of America's approach at the APEC Summit is its focus on values. While trade and economics are at the center, the U.S. often talks about human rights, environmental protection, and workers' welfare. The message is that growth should be responsible, not just about profit, but also about people. This is sometimes called inclusive growth. It's the idea that economic success should benefit everyone, especially those who are often left behind, such as women, small business owners, and rural communities.
Yes, and that connects to another major goal: sustainability. The US has been encouraging APEC economies to move toward clean energy and greener production. This means using renewable energy sources like wind and solar instead of depending only on oil or coal. The American government sees climate-friendly technology as the next big opportunity for both economic growth and environmental protection. So when American leaders talk at APEC, they often highlight projects that create jobs while reducing pollution.
And beyond trade and environment, the U.S. also uses the APEC platform to strengthen its strategic relationships in the Asia-Pacific region. The Pacific is home to many of America's closest allies, like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and Canada, as well as rising economies such as Vietnam and Indonesia. Through APEC, the U.S. can maintain strong ties with these partners, coordinate policies, and ensure that regional development supports peace and stability. This is often called economic diplomacy, where trade and foreign policy work together.
That's very true. A PEC gives the United States a soft but powerful way to influence the direction of regional growth. Instead of using military power, it uses economic engagement, building trust through trade, investment, and shared goals. For English learners, it's a good example of how diplomacy works in real life. Words like collaboration, policy alignment, and strategic partnership describe the invisible cooperation that keeps global systems running smoothly. The US relies on these connections to stay a leading voice in international affairs.
Of course, America's goals are not always easy to achieve. Sometimes, other countries don't agree with U.S. proposals, especially when they feel that American policies favor its own interests. That's why APEC discussions often require patience and compromise. Diplomats must listen carefully, understand cultural differences, and find middle ground. This is a good reminder for our listeners that communication, whether between countries or between people, is a skill that requires respect, empathy, and clear understanding.
That's beautifully said, Adam. And it's also what makes APEC such an interesting learning space for English learners. When you study how countries express their ideas in meetings like these, you also learn how to express your own opinions clearly in English. Words like mutual benefit, long-term vision, and shared prosperity are not just political phrases. They are powerful expressions you can use in business discussions or academic conversations. They help you sound confident and thoughtful when speaking English.
Exactly, Julia. So, to summarize America's main goals at the APEC Summit, the U.S. wants to support fair trade, promote innovation, ensure security, strengthen alliances, and encourage sustainable development. These goals are deeply connected to the idea of creating a stable and fair global economy. The APEC Summit is where these ideas are tested, where America listens, negotiates, and presents its vision for a world that grows together through cooperation, responsibility, and shared progress.
Yes, and in the next part of our podcast, we'll take a close look at China's position and strategic goals at the APEC Summit. Understanding both sides, the American and the Chinese, will help us see the bigger picture of how the future of global trade is being shaped. It will also give you, our dear listeners, a chance to learn new vocabulary and expressions that describe how countries plan, cooperate, and sometimes compete on the world stage. So stay tuned as we continue exploring this fascinating topic. Now that we've explored America's goals at the APEC Summit, it's time to turn our attention to another major player, China. When we talk about APEC, it's impossible to ignore China's presence because of its massive economic power and growing influence across the Asia-Pacific region. China has become one of the strongest voices in the forum, and its strategies often shape the entire conversation. But to understand China's position clearly, we need to look beyond trade numbers and explore what drives its long-term vision.
That's true, Julia. China's goals at APEC are not only about increasing exports or building new partnerships, they are also about shaping the rules of global trade. China sees the Asia-Pacific region as a vital space where it can share its development model, promote cooperation, and strengthen regional connectivity. In simple words, China wants to be seen not just as a participant, but as a leader that helps guide growth in a more balanced and inclusive way. This approach combines economics, diplomacy, and soft power, a mixture that makes China's position unique.
Yes, and one of China's biggest priorities is economic growth through connectivity. That's where its famous Belt and Road Initiative comes into play. This project focuses on building infrastructure, roads, railways, ports, and digital networks to connect Asia with Africa and Europe. While APEC is not directly part of the Belt and Road Plan, the ideas are connected. Both aim to make trade easier and faster. China often uses APEC meetings to highlight how better infrastructure can bring shared benefits to all economies, especially developing ones.
Exactly, Julia. Another important goal for China is regional cooperation. The country promotes a message of win-win development, which means success for one nation should not come at the expense of another. China's leaders often emphasize that cooperation and peace are the best ways to achieve prosperity. They believe that by building trust through trade, investment, and dialogue, countries can avoid unnecessary conflict and focus on common interests like innovation, education, and environmental protection. It's a vision of harmony through progress.
That's a nice way to explain it, Adam. And from an English learning point of view, this is a great example of how to use positive and diplomatic language. Words like shared prosperity, mutual respect, and collaborative growth are often used by diplomats to express friendly intentions. Understanding how such language works can help learners improve their speaking skills, especially in professional or academic situations where tone matters as much as vocabulary. Diplomacy is not only about politics, it's also about communication.
Very true, Julia. Now, another major focus of China at APEC is technology and innovation. Over the last 2 decades, China has transformed from a manufacturing-based economy to a technology-driven one. Its government has invested heavily in artificial intelligence, clean energy, and digital industries. At APEC meetings, China often calls for cooperation in digital transformation, things like e-commerce, online education, and smart infrastructure. The message is clear. The future of trade depends on how well countries adapt to the digital world.
And China's approach to technology also highlights another goal: independence and self-reliance. While China values global cooperation, it also wants to reduce its dependence on foreign technologies and supply chains. This goal became stronger after trade tensions with the United States in recent years. During APEC discussions, Chinese representatives often emphasize that every country should have the right to develop its own industries freely, without external pressure. It's part of China's larger vision of protecting national interests while staying open to collaboration.
That's an important balance, Julia. And speaking of balance, China also pays close attention to sustainable development, which means growing without harming the planet. In recent years, Chinese leaders have made strong promises to reduce carbon emissions and invest in renewable energy. At the APEC Summit, China encourages member economies to cooperate on green energy, environmental protection, and climate-friendly technologies. These topics are not just environmental, they're also economic, because the green industry is becoming one of the fastest-growing sectors in the world.
Yes, and that connects perfectly to China's idea of a shared future. This phrase is often used in Chinese diplomacy to describe a world where countries depend on each other for progress and peace. In the context of APEC, it means that no country can grow alone. Economic success must come through cooperation, dialogue, and fairness. This message resonates with many developing economies that want to benefit from globalization, but also want their voices to be heard in international discussions.
And Julia, we should also mention how China uses APEC to build stronger relationships with neighboring countries. Through side meetings, trade agreements, and cultural exchanges, China works to strengthen ties with nations like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines. These countries are key partners in regional growth, and by deepening cooperation with them, China expands its influence while also supporting local development. It's a strategy built on long-term relationships, rather than short-term competition.
That's right, Adam. It's what we could call economic diplomacy, using trade, aid, and development projects to create goodwill. China believes that by investing in others, it builds trust and stability. However, This approach sometimes raises questions from other major powers, especially the United States, about transparency and control. But for English learners, this is a good opportunity to learn how countries communicate through diplomacy. Words like dialogue, cooperation, and mutual benefit appear again and again in international speeches.
Exactly, Julia. And it's important for listeners to know that China's vision at APEC is not about confrontation, but about leadership through partnership. It's about showing that economic growth can be achieved together, not through competition alone. Whether one agrees with China's model or not, there's no doubt that its voice has become central in every APEC discussion. The way China combines infrastructure, technology, and diplomacy shows how much influence it now has on global trade decisions.
Yes, and in a way, APEC has become a mirror of the modern world, a place where countries with different political systems, economic models, and cultures come together to discuss shared challenges. For learners, studying China's goals in APEC also helps understand key concepts in global English communication: respect, understanding, and clarity. When diplomats talk about strategic goals, economic vision, or regional partnership, they're not just using big words, they're expressing ideas about how to manage relationships peacefully in a complex world.
Beautifully said, Julia. So, to sum up, China's main goals at the APEC Summit can be grouped into 5 areas: connectivity, regional cooperation, technological innovation, sustainable growth, and global influence. These goals shape China's participation in APEC and influence how other countries respond. The country wants to be seen as a reliable partner, a responsible leader, and a supporter of shared prosperity. Its message is simple but powerful, that the world grows stronger when countries work together with respect and understanding.
Exactly, Adam. And now that we've discussed both sides, America and China, our listeners can begin to see why the APEC Summit is often described as a showdown. It's not a fight, but a careful balancing act between two global powers that both want progress, though in different ways. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into that dynamic and explore how the US and China interact at APEC, where cooperation meets competition and where the future of global trade is being quietly negotiated.
As we move deeper into our discussion about the APEC Summit, we now reach one of the most interesting and sometimes tense parts: the relationship between the United States and China. Many people around the world pay close attention to what happens when these two countries meet at events like APEC, because their words and decisions can influence the direction of global trade. The summit often becomes a stage where both nations present their own visions for the future of the world economy, and this year was no different.
That's true, Adam. The APEC Summit is not only a meeting of leaders, it's also a place where ideas compete. On one hand, the United States comes to the table emphasizing the values of transparency, open markets, and fair competition. American officials often talk about creating a trading environment where all countries can follow the same clear rules, protect intellectual property, and have equal access to opportunities. They believe that fairness in trade helps innovation and benefits ordinary people through honest competition.
Yes, and on the other hand, China's approach is based on the ideas of shared growth and mutual respect. Chinese representatives often speak about cooperation that focuses on win-win results, meaning that every country should benefit from trade, not just the biggest economies. They talk about building trust and long-term partnerships, especially with developing countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. From their perspective, trade should not be a zero-sum game where one side wins and the other loses. It should be about growing together.
That's a really good way to describe it, Adam. When we look closely at these two positions, we can see that both the US and China have strong arguments. The US believes in creating a transparent system where no country can take unfair advantage, while China believes that economic cooperation should include everyone, even smaller economies. In contrast, these goals sometimes pull in different directions because what one country sees as protection or security, the other might see as limitation or control.
Exactly, Julia. And this difference in perspective often creates moments of tension at international meetings. For example, American delegates may push for stronger rules on technology transfer or data protection, while Chinese officials might argue that those rules could slow down global innovation or unfairly target their companies. These are not just disagreements. They are deep debates about how the future of trade should look. That's why it's sometimes called a showdown, even though it's a diplomatic one, not a hostile fight.
Yes, but it's also important to remember that even during disagreements, both countries understand how connected they are. The US and China are each other's largest trading partners, and millions of jobs in both nations depend on this relationship. From another perspective, the APEC Summit gives them a space to talk face-to-face, to clear misunderstandings, and to find small areas of cooperation that can slowly build trust again. So even a little progress at these meetings can mean a lot for the world economy.
That's such an important point. And for our English learners, this is a great opportunity to learn some practical phrases for discussion and debate. For example, when we want to compare two different opinions, we can say on the one hand and on the other hand. When we want to show a difference, we can use in contrast. And when we try to understand another opinion, we can say from another perspective. These phrases make your English sound more thoughtful and professional, especially in academic or business discussions.
Right, Adam. Let's show our listeners how to use them naturally. If we say, on one hand, America focuses on transparency and fairness. On the other hand, China emphasizes cooperation and shared development. We are comparing two valid points without arguing. This kind of balanced sentence is very useful when you are writing essays, giving presentations, or speaking in discussions. It shows that you can think critically and see an issue from more than one side, which is a very important skill for English learners.
And when we use in contrast, it's often to highlight a clear difference. For example, in contrast to the US, China prefers long-term partnerships instead of strict trade rules. That sentence clearly shows that two ideas are not the same. And when we use from another perspective, it helps us sound more understanding and open-minded. For example, from another perspective, China's approach may help smaller nations grow faster. These expressions are simple, but they add great depth to your speech.
Yes, and if we think about the APEC Summit as a classroom for the world, we can see how these expressions also reflect real diplomatic behavior. When countries talk about global issues, they don't only say who is right or wrong, they try to understand different perspectives. The US and China may use different words and policies, but both sides know that the world economy works better when communication stays open. Even competition can become healthy if it pushes countries to do better, not just to win.
That's so true, Julia. It's like a conversation between two people who have different goals but still respect each other's point of view. The US wants transparency, meaning that business rules should be clear and fair, while China wants inclusion, meaning that every country should have a chance to develop. Both goals sound positive, but the challenge lies in balancing them. This is what makes the APEC Summit so fascinating. It's a real-life example of global negotiation happening through words, not conflict.
And for our listeners, this part of the discussion is a perfect chance to practice listening to tone and opinion in English. Notice how Adam and I are using words like believe, argue, prefer, suggest, and focus on. These verbs are often used when expressing opinions diplomatically. Instead of saying America is right or China is wrong, we say the US believes or China argues. That small difference in language helps you sound more respectful, objective, and professional when discussing sensitive topics.
Absolutely, Julia. In the end, the US-China relationship at APEC shows us how complex global trade really is. There are no simple winners or losers. Every decision has consequences, and every policy reflects deeper national interests. What matters most is dialogue, the ability to keep talking, listening, and trying to understand. For English learners, this kind of topic is not only educational, but also inspiring, because it teaches how powerful communication can be in solving global challenges.
That's a beautiful message to end this section on, Adam. Dear listeners, as you think about what we've discussed, try to use the expressions you learned today. On the one hand, on the other hand, in contrast, and from another perspective. Practice them in your own sentences, maybe even in the comments below. Tell us what you think. Should countries compete or cooperate in trade? We'd love to see your ideas and help you grow through discussion, just like the world learns through dialogue.
After discussing the US and China's roles in the APEC Summit, it's time to look at something equally important: the part played by other countries. The Asia-Pacific region is incredibly diverse, full of economies that range from some of the richest in the world to some that are still developing. Each country comes to the APEC table with its own priorities, interests, and visions for growth. Understanding their roles helps us see that APEC is not just about two giants. It's about 21 economies learning how to grow together.
Exactly, Adam. When people read news about the APEC Summit, they often focus only on the United States and China because of their global influence. But if we look closely, countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the ASEAN nations play a huge role in keeping balance and stability within the group. They often act as mediators, which means they help reduce tension, encourage dialogue, and make sure the discussions stay focused on cooperation instead of conflict. That's a very delicate and valuable responsibility.
That's true, Julia. Let's start with Japan, one of the founding members of APEC and one of Asia's most developed economies. Japan usually supports free and open trade while also promoting innovation and technology. It often takes the role of a bridge, connecting Western economies like the US with Asian economies that have different trade systems. Japan believes that strong regional cooperation can make Asia more competitive globally, and that shared technological progress leads to fairer and faster economic growth across borders.
Yes, and South Korea also plays a very special part. It has transformed from a developing country into a global economic power in just a few decades, which makes it a great example for emerging markets, countries that are growing quickly and becoming more industrialized. South Korea often emphasizes digital trade, innovation, and environmental sustainability in APEC meetings. Its experience shows that investment in education, technology, and fair trade policies can turn small economies into powerful international players.
And then we have Australia, another very active and respected APEC member. Australia often focuses on transparency, economic inclusiveness, and open dialogue between developed and developing economies. Because of its geography and political ties, Australia sometimes acts as a balancing force, maintaining strong relations with the US while also engaging deeply with Asian partners. It promotes what we call the middle path, encouraging countries to cooperate even when their political views or systems are different.
That's a great point, Adam. And when we talk about balance and cooperation, we can't forget the ASEAN nations. That's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which includes countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. These nations are often described as emerging markets because their economies are growing rapidly. They bring a collective voice to APEC, reminding everyone that trade must also help people, not just big corporations. They focus on inclusive growth, digital transformation, and regional peace.
Yes, the ASEAN members often serve as a strong reminder that development should be shared. They bring the perspective of nations that are still building their industries and want to ensure that globalization doesn't leave them behind. For many of these countries, APEC offers training, partnerships, and access to international markets. For example, small businesses from Vietnam or the Philippines can learn through APEC programs how to export their products, use e-commerce, and meet international trade standards. That's real empowerment through cooperation.
And this is where APEC becomes more than just a discussion platform. It becomes a development engine. Through various initiatives, APEC supports capacity building, which means helping countries strengthen their skills, industries, and governance systems. Developing economies can benefit from technology transfer, digital education, and infrastructure projects supported by more advanced members. This exchange of knowledge and resources helps close the gap between rich and poor economies in the Asia-Pacific region, making trade more sustainable and fair.
Exactly. For English learners, this idea is captured in a useful term, regional cooperation. It simply means countries in the same area working together for shared goals like trade, education, or security. It's a key idea in APEC because no country can grow alone. When Japan invests in innovation programs, or Australia supports green energy initiatives, or South Korea shares digital technology, these actions benefit the entire region. This cooperation leads to economic growth that lifts everyone together, not just one country.
And let's not forget that many APEC discussions are about future challenges. Topics like climate change, clean energy, and digital transformation require teamwork. Smaller economies often have the ideas and motivation, while bigger ones have the resources and technology. When they come together under APEC, they create what economists call synergy, a situation where the total result is greater than the sum of individual efforts. It's a great vocabulary word to remember because it describes how cooperation multiplies progress.
Yes, synergy is a wonderful word for today's lesson. It also reflects how diplomacy works. Even though countries compete, they know that collaboration makes everyone stronger. For example, South Korea and Japan might have political disagreements, but at APEC, they often work side by side on digital trade policies. Likewise, the US and China may compete globally, but both support projects that improve supply chains and make trade smoother. These moments of cooperation are what keep the Asia-Pacific region moving forward.
That's right, Adam. And from a language learning point of view, today's discussion is full of useful vocabulary for global topics. Let's review a few. Emerging markets, economies that are growing fast but are not yet fully developed. Regional cooperation, when neighboring countries work together for progress. And economic growth, an increase in the production and wealth of a country. You can use these terms when talking about international business, economics, or even in your IELTS and TOEFL essays.
Perfect summary, Julia. What's beautiful about APEC is that it gives every member, big or small, a voice. Whether it's Japan pushing for innovation, Australia supporting open dialogue, or ASEAN countries advocating for fair development, each plays a part in shaping a shared future. It shows that leadership is not always about power. Sometimes it's about cooperation, compromise, and understanding. And for us, as English learners and global citizens, that's a valuable lesson to remember in every conversation we have.
So true, Adam. And as we look at the broader picture, we can say that the role of smaller countries in APEC is not small at all. It's essential. They keep discussions balanced, ensure fair representation, and remind the world that progress must include everyone. For our dear listeners, think of APEC as a living example of teamwork at the highest level. It's like a big classroom where each country brings its knowledge, listens to others, and learns something new to take back home and use for future growth.
That's a wonderful image to close this section, Julia. Dear listeners, as you think about what you've learned today, try to use some of these new vocabulary words in your own sentences. For example, emerging markets are becoming important for regional cooperation, or Economic growth depends on collaboration between developed and developing countries. Practicing like this helps you not only improve your English but also understand how our world is built on shared progress and communication.
Yes, and as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Which APEC country do you think plays the most important role in promoting cooperation? Is it Japan, Australia, or maybe one of the ASEAN nations? Tell us what you think and practice your English by writing full sentences. We always enjoy reading your messages and learning where you are listening from. Stay tuned, because in the next section, we'll look at how APEC turns these discussions into real policies that impact the everyday lives of millions.
As we continue our journey through the APEC Summit, it's time to talk about what really fills the meeting rooms, the major topics that shape our shared future. While trade and investment are always central themes, this year's summit brought forward a range of new and urgent global issues. From climate change and sustainable trade to digital transformation and supply chain security, leaders from every country had something important to say. These topics are not just political, they affect our daily lives in very real ways.
That's right, Adam. Many of these discussions may sound complex, but they actually connect to the simple things we do every day. For example, when we talk about climate change, it's not only about melting glaciers or rising sea levels. It's also about how we produce and use energy, how we manage waste, and how industries can operate in ways that protect our planet for future generations. The word that describes this balance is sustainability, which means living and working in a way that doesn't harm the environment or use up natural resources too quickly.
Yes, and sustainability has become one of the most important words in global discussions. Every APEC member now agrees that growth must be green, meaning that economic progress should not come at the cost of the planet. Leaders talk about developing clean energy technologies, reducing carbon emissions, and promoting eco-friendly innovation. For our listeners, this is a good moment to learn a key phrase: carbon footprint. It means the total amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that a person, company, or country produces through their activities.
Exactly. If we think of it simply, your carbon footprint is like your personal environmental mark. It shows how much your lifestyle affects the planet. Driving a car, using electricity, and buying imported goods all add to your carbon footprint. APEC countries are now working on strategies to reduce these footprints by investing in renewable energy sources like solar, wind, and hydropower. These efforts not only help the environment, but also create new industries and jobs. It's a great example of how sustainability connects with economic growth.
And that brings us to the second major topic of the APEC Summit: sustainable trade. This means creating trade systems that support both economic progress and environmental care. For instance, countries are now discussing how to make supply chains more efficient while also reducing waste and pollution. They are encouraging businesses to produce goods responsibly and to respect labor standards. It's no longer enough just to trade more. Now the question is, how to trade better. This shift in mindset is something that defines the modern global economy.
Yes, Adam. And sustainable trade also includes helping smaller businesses join global markets. Many APEC programs aim to support small and medium-sized enterprises, often called SMEs, by giving them digital tools, training, and access to online platforms. When more people can participate in trade, it increases fairness and opportunity. For English learners, it's useful to remember that sustainable doesn't only mean green. It also means something that can continue for a long time without causing harm or collapse. It's about balance and responsibility.
That's a perfect explanation, Julia. The third big topic discussed at the APEC Summit this year was digital transformation. This is another term we hear a lot, but it's important to understand what it really means. Digital transformation is the process of using technology to improve the way we live, work, and do business. It includes everything from online education and e-commerce to artificial intelligence and smart cities. It's not just about computers, It's about innovation, using creativity and technology to make systems faster, safer, and more inclusive.
Exactly. Digital transformation changes how governments deliver services, how businesses connect with customers, and how people learn and communicate. For example, during the pandemic, millions of people started working and studying online. That's a direct example of digital transformation in real life. APEC leaders now focus on building digital infrastructure, expanding internet access to remote areas, and ensuring digital equality so that everyone, not only wealthy countries, can benefit from technology. This also supports social inclusion and long-term growth.
That's a really important point. Digital technology can reduce inequality, but only if countries share access fairly. And that's why another big concern at the summit was supply chain security, a term that became very popular after the world faced shortages of essential goods during global crises. A supply chain is the system that moves products from where they are made to where they are sold, like food, electronics, or medicines. When that system breaks down, prices rise, businesses suffer, and people struggle. It affects everyone, everywhere.
Yes, supply chain security is something we all felt during recent years. When factories closed, or when transportation slowed down, we saw how connected our world really is. APEC leaders are now working on creating stronger, more flexible supply chains that can survive future disruptions. That means diversifying production, not depending too much on one country or one company, and improving logistics through better technology. These actions make the global economy more resilient and stable for everyone involved, from farmers to large corporations.
And that's where all these topics connect beautifully. Climate change, digital transformation, supply chain security, they may sound different, but they are all part of one big picture. Each one affects inflation, energy prices, and even the cost of daily goods. For example, when energy becomes more expensive, transportation costs rise, which increases prices in shops. So when APEC leaders discuss energy policies or digital solutions, they are indirectly talking about the cost of living for millions of families. It's all deeply connected.
Exactly, Adam. And for our English learners, understanding this connection helps you build vocabulary for both economics and the environment. Words like sustainability, carbon footprint, innovation policy, and supply chain are now part of everyday global conversations. If you can use these words correctly, you'll sound more confident and informed. For example, you could say, APEC countries are creating innovation policies to support sustainable trade. That's a clear, strong sentence that shows good language control and awareness of global issues.
That's a great example, Julia. And another practical sentence could be, reducing our carbon footprint helps protect the environment while supporting long-term economic growth. This kind of sentence connects environmental responsibility with economic logic, which is exactly what APEC tries to do. It's a balance between growth and care, between technology and humanity. The leaders understand that success in the modern world is not only about making profits, but about protecting the planet and improving people's lives.
Yes, Adam. And what's interesting is how APEC encourages innovation policy. Another useful term for our listeners. It refers to government strategies that support new technologies and creative ideas. Innovation policies help companies invent new products, improve energy systems, and build cleaner industries. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and Singapore are leading examples of how innovation drives sustainability. They invest heavily in research and development to find smarter, greener solutions that can inspire other APEC members to follow.
And that's the true spirit of APEC, learning from one another and sharing progress. Each member brings its strengths to the table. Some have advanced technology, others have natural resources, and many have young, creative populations full of potential. By working together on these key topics, they're not only solving today's problems, but preparing for tomorrow's challenges. It's a reminder that the future of trade and growth depends on cooperation, knowledge sharing, and a commitment to sustainability in every sense.
That's such a powerful message, Adam. And for our dear listeners, the takeaway is this. Every time you hear about a global summit like APEC, try to think beyond politics. Think about the shared issues, climate, technology, energy, and stability, that connect us all. These topics show that our world is truly interdependent. Improving your English while learning about them gives you a double advantage. You become not only more fluent but also more aware of the complex, fascinating world we live in together.
Well said, Julia. So, as you continue practicing English, try to include global topics in your learning. Use words like sustainability, digital transformation, and supply chain security in your conversations or writing. These are the terms that shape modern communication. And remember, every word you learn is a key that opens a new way of thinking. The more you understand how the world works, the more meaningful your language becomes. And that's what learning English at the English Globe is all about. The future of global trade is one of the most fascinating and complex topics in our world today. As we move beyond the pandemic, many nations are still recovering from the economic shocks that disrupted production, transportation, and employment. The APEC Summit has become a critical stage for discussing how to rebuild economies and shape a more connected future. Countries are now rethinking their economic strategies, focusing more on innovation, sustainability, and technology. These trends are changing not just trade policies, but the way people live and work every day. Understanding this helps learners see how language, economics, and global cooperation come together in real life.
That's right, Adam. The pandemic was a wake-up call for global leaders, showing just how interdependent economies have become. A factory closing in one country can delay production in another part of the world. That's why APEC members are now focusing on resilience, the ability to recover quickly from crises. One of the major discussions at the summit is about AI-driven industries. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is not only about robots and automation, it's about making business processes smarter. For example, AI can forecast market trends, manage logistics, and even reduce waste. This technology could lead to faster, cleaner, and more efficient global trade systems.
Exactly. But technology also brings new challenges. While AI and automation improve productivity, they can also replace traditional jobs, creating a need for new skills. This may result in workers needing retraining or education to fit into the changing job market. That's why APEC countries are discussing how to create programs that help people adapt to these shifts. Investing in education, innovation, and digital literacy is likely to be a key factor for success in the global economy. Countries that prepare their citizens for future jobs will have a major advantage.
Another important area shaping the future of global trade is the green economy. This concept focuses on economic growth that is both sustainable and environmentally responsible. Many APEC members are developing renewable energy technologies and promoting eco-friendly business models. These initiatives are not just about protecting nature. They are about creating new trade opportunities. For instance, countries leading in solar or wind energy technology could become major exporters in the near future. A transition toward clean energy may result in long-term benefits for both the planet and the economy.
Yes, and sustainability also means fairness in trade. Many developing economies in the APEC region face trade barriers that prevent them from competing equally. These include high tariffs, complex regulations, and limited access to modern technology. If these barriers are reduced, smaller economies could benefit from greater participation in global markets. Fair trade policies are likely to create more balanced relationships between rich and developing countries, leading to inclusive and stable economic growth across the region.
And we can't talk about the future of trade without mentioning digital transformation. The rise of e-commerce has completely changed how goods and services are exchanged. Even small businesses now sell to customers across continents through digital platforms. This has created new jobs and opportunities, especially for young entrepreneurs. However, digital trade also depends on internet access and cybersecurity. Countries need to build stronger digital infrastructure to make sure everyone, including people in rural and low-income areas, can benefit equally from online trade.
That's a crucial point. Another factor that will shape the future of global trade is trust. Trust between nations allows agreements to be signed, investments to be made, and innovation to spread. When countries lose trust, cooperation slows down and trade suffers. That's why APEC plays a vital role. It gives nations a space to discuss differences, share ideas, and build understanding. By focusing on transparency and dialogue, countries could create a more predictable and fair trading environment for everyone.
In the end, the global economy after the pandemic is entering a new era, one defined by technology, sustainability, and cooperation. The challenges are real, from trade barriers to digital inequality, but so are the opportunities. APEC countries that work together, share knowledge, and promote fair trade practices may lead the way toward a more stable and innovative world economy. For English learners, this topic is not only about politics or economics. It's also about understanding how words like innovation, sustainability, and partnership shape the conversations of our future. As we approach the final part of today's discussion, it's important to step back and think about what the APEC Summit really teaches us, not only about trade, but about the skills we can develop as English learners. Understanding global trade is not just for economists or politicians. It can actually improve your English and your awareness of the world. When we follow topics like sustainability, AI, and digital transformation, we are also practicing new vocabulary, sentence structures, and ways to express complex ideas clearly. Words like globalization, economic literacy, and mutual understanding suddenly become part of your everyday language toolkit.
Exactly, Julia. And when we talk about improving English, it's important to focus on ideas, not just individual words. Instead of memorizing vocabulary in isolation, try listening for the main concepts, the key messages that connect sentences and paragraphs. For example, when we discuss trade barriers or AI industries, the goal is not only to understand what those terms mean, but to see how they fit together in a larger story. This skill, recognizing ideas and patterns, is incredibly valuable. It trains your brain to think in English, not just translate from your native language, which is a huge step in fluency.
Yes, Adam. Another important point is that following global topics helps build communication skills. When you understand complex issues like trade agreements, climate initiatives, or supply chain security, you can explain them to others in your own words. This is exactly what leaders at APEC do every day. They summarize ideas, negotiate, and share perspectives in a way that others can understand. Practicing this in English makes you more confident, more precise, and more capable of discussing international issues, even if your audience is your classmates, colleagues, or online friends.
And let's not forget economic literacy, another key skill we can develop while learning English. By following APEC discussions, we begin to understand how countries make decisions, why prices rise or fall, and how technology or climate policies affect our daily lives. Economic literacy is not only about numbers, it's about understanding cause and effect, about connecting ideas, and about thinking critically. For example, you might hear that supply chain disruptions can lead to higher prices for food or electronics. That's economic literacy in action. It's the ability to see the bigger picture.
Exactly. And when we combine economic literacy with language learning, we are preparing for a truly global perspective. This is also about mutual understanding, recognizing that people, companies, and governments from different countries have their own perspectives, goals, and challenges. When we listen carefully and discuss thoughtfully, we practice empathy and diplomacy in language. For English learners, This is golden because it goes beyond grammar or vocabulary. It teaches you how to communicate in a world where differences matter, but collaboration is essential.
Another way this helps learners is by encouraging active listening. Don't just focus on individual words. Listen for how ideas flow, how sentences connect, and how speakers emphasize key points. When Julia and I discuss topics like globalization or digital transformation, try to notice which points are main ideas, which are examples, and which are consequences. This approach not only improves comprehension, it trains you to speak more clearly in English when you explain complex ideas yourself.
And the beautiful thing is that these lessons are universal. The story of APEC, countries working together, competing, negotiating, and sharing knowledge, mirrors what happens in classrooms, workplaces, and even social interactions. By following these discussions, English learners gain a sense of global awareness, which is increasingly important in a world where globalization touches almost every aspect of life. You begin to understand current events, debates, and policies, and you can describe them accurately in English.
Yes, Julia. And let's also remember that learning English in this way is not just about improving language skills. It's about becoming an informed global citizen. When you understand trade, economics, climate issues, or technological trends, you can discuss them thoughtfully with anyone. That requires a combination of vocabulary, critical thinking, and communication skills. Expressions like could result in, is likely to, and from another perspective become tools for connecting ideas and engaging in meaningful dialogue.
Exactly. Dear listeners, the key takeaway is this. Following global discussions like the APEC Summit improves your English, sharpens your mind, and increases your understanding of the world. Words like globalization, economic literacy, mutual understanding, and communication skills are not just vocabulary. They are skills for life. By practicing listening for main ideas, reflecting on what you hear, and explaining it in your own words, you are training both your English and your perspective on global issues.
So, as we conclude this section, remember to practice actively. Listen to news or podcasts in English, take notes on the key ideas, and try to discuss them with others. Imagine yourself explaining a topic like supply chain security, digital transformation, or sustainable trade. Even if you make mistakes, you're learning to connect language with thinking and global awareness. This is the essence of education in a globalized world, and it's exactly what APEC teaches us through its discussions and initiatives.
And as always, we encourage you to practice by sharing your thoughts in the comments. Try using some of the phrases and vocabulary we discussed today, such as globalization, mutual understanding, and economic literacy. Tell us how you see the future of global trade, or which APEC topic interests you most. Engaging actively like this is one of the best ways to improve your English while connecting with the world.
As we reach the final part of our podcast, it's helpful to take a moment and reflect on everything we've explored today. We started by examining the history of the APEC Summit, the reasons it was created, and how it has grown into one of the most important forums for economic cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region. Then we looked at the dynamic rivalry between the United States and China, discussing how their different priorities, from transparency and competition to shared growth and mutual respect, shaped the conversations at the summit. Alongside this, we explored how smaller APEC members like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the ASEAN nations play crucial roles in balancing these discussions and ensuring that all voices are heard.
Yes, Adam. We also analysed the key economic topics that dominate the summit agenda today, from climate change and sustainability to digital transformation and supply chain security. Each of these topics has real-world implications, not only for governments and businesses, but for ordinary people around the world. And through it all, we've highlighted how global trade and international cooperation could lead to opportunities for growth, innovation, and a cleaner, fairer economy. Understanding these issues is not only about politics or economics. It's about seeing the world as an interconnected place where every decision has consequences and every country's perspective matters.
Exactly. And for our listeners who are learning English, this entire journey provides something more than just vocabulary or grammar. It gives a clear example of how language connects with knowledge, understanding, and global awareness. Words like globalization, mutual understanding, economic literacy, and communication skills are not just academic terms. They are tools that help you navigate complex discussions, explain ideas clearly, and engage with people from different cultures. Learning English through topics like trade and global cooperation shows that language is a bridge connecting ideas, people, and nations.
Another important takeaway is how future challenges and opportunities are deeply linked to cooperation. Whether we are talking about AI-driven industries, sustainable trade, or climate initiatives, the success of these efforts depends on countries working together. The same principle applies to language learning. You can study alone, but your growth accelerates when you communicate, exchange ideas, and practice with others. Cooperation in trade mirrors, cooperation in language learning, both require patience, understanding, and respect for different perspectives.
Yes, Julia. And reflecting on APEC's story, we can see that even in a world full of competition, dialogue and collaboration remain essential. The summit teaches us that leaders must balance rivalry with partnership, and that success often comes from listening, adapting, and finding shared goals. Similarly, when learning English, listening carefully, understanding context, and connecting ideas are key strategies. You learn not only words, but also how to think, reason, and express yourself in ways that others can understand. That is a lesson that applies to life, work, and global citizenship.
Exactly, Adam. Another lesson is that language and knowledge are empowering. The more you understand about topics like globalization, sustainability, and digital transformation, the more confidently you can communicate your ideas. English becomes more than a school subject. It becomes a bridge to the world. When you discuss international trade, climate initiatives, or economic cooperation, you are practicing critical thinking while improving your language. This combination of skills makes you more aware of global issues and better equipped to participate in discussions that matter, both in your personal and professional life.
And that's what makes this conversation so inspiring. The story of APEC is ultimately a story about shared futures, countries learning from each other, balancing interests, and creating opportunities for all. Similarly, learning English is a story about building bridges between people, connecting ideas across cultures, and growing as a global citizen. Every word, every phrase, every sentence you practice becomes part of a larger picture. It's a reminder that education, communication, and understanding are tools for building a more connected, thoughtful, and cooperative world.
So, dear listeners, as we conclude today's podcast, remember this: English is not just a language. It is a key that opens doors to knowledge, culture, and global understanding. Just as APEC encourages countries to work together to solve common problems and create opportunities, you can use English to learn, communicate, and connect with people around the world. Think of your language skills as a bridge, one that brings ideas, people, and nations closer, and helps you participate actively in shaping a shared future.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us on this deep exploration of the APEC Summit and what it teaches us about trade, cooperation, and language learning. Keep practicing, keep listening, and keep engaging with global topics. Remember to use the vocabulary and expressions we've shared today, like globalization, communication skills, economic literacy, and mutual understanding. These are not just words, they are tools for thinking, connecting, and thriving in a fast-changing world.
And before we end, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are listening from and how you think global trade and language learning can shape the future. Your opinions are part of this conversation, and practicing English in this way makes you a more informed and confident global citizen. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to exploring more topics together in our next episode.